Hey, my name is Brendan, and this is another video in my series on sound design and synthesis, where we'll be learning how to turn the sounds that are in your head into real synths you can use in your projects. As always, we'll be using Helm, the free cross-platform synth software, which I've put a link to in the description of this video, in case you haven't gotten it yet. And today, I thought I would take a look at some different things that we have to consider when we're working on making an evolving sound in general. And to start today, we'll be making sort of an evolving bass sound, a la Blade Runner, or things like that, where there's, instead of that sort of quick, plucky sound, which we'll be getting onto in another video, this is sort of a slower building sound that has maybe some moving parts in it and even maybe some rhythmic structure to it as well. And to start off, I think I'd like to take a look at an oscillator we haven't really looked into much, which is the sub oscillator. So I'm going to just zero out our first two oscillators and get our sub up to around mid-level. And as I've said before, the sub oscillator, which I'll play it here, is, similar in a lot of ways to these oscillators up here. A key difference being that it is, of course, an octave down. And I can bring it down even further if I want. But I don't want to do that much for this. And you can pick different waveforms, lots of different options. I think a square does tend to work rather well for bass sounds, but if you want a clear sort of sub-sine sound, you can obviously use a sine, which is good for just adding some bottom end without really poking into the mix too much. It's good for sort of filling out sort of a bass harmonic range in like a hip-hop track or something like that. But we are going to use a square wave in today's video. And one thing that is different about the sub as opposed to the other oscillators is that it has this cool shuffle function, which I'm just going to show you a visual example of on the oscilloscope. So if I hold down a note, let's say this C on my keyboard, you'll see what you would expect in the oscilloscope, which is a square-shaped waveform. And you'll notice that, just like in this picture here, the two different sections of the square wave are pretty much equally spaced apart. And if we use this little shuffle function, I'd like you to take a look at what happens to our waveform up in the oscilloscope. Sort of getting crunched and compressed together. No longer are there two equal sides to the same wave. There are two pretty drastically different sides. And you'll notice that as we move through this, we get sort of a phasing sound effect, which is going to be one of the core building blocks that we'll be using in today's video. And instead of having me manually move this shuffle knob back and forth, we're going to use a bit of modulation, as we have before. And when we know that we want to modulate something in sort of a rhythmic way, that's moving back and forth, as opposed to just up and then back to a starting value, we know that we're going to want to use one of these LFOs, these low-frequency oscillators. And I'm just going to grab this first one here, the mono LFO, and I'm going to go ahead and click the helmet. And I know I want to set the shuffle. I'm going to set a sort of arbitrary value to start, not huge. And I'm going to click on that to save it. And I'm just going to hold this to hear how it sounds. Which is getting a little closer to the sound I want, but I think is a bit too fast. I want something that sort of builds a little bit over time. Let's do a middle between those two. And I might just fine-tune this and poke around to see where I want a good starting position to be. Because you do get pretty radically different effects depending on where you start this out. All right, I think somewhere around there is probably a good space for now. And before I get too much further in, like I said at the beginning of this video, I want this to be an evolving sound that is a bit slower. So I'm going to go ahead and change our amplitude envelope to modulate the sound, or the volume rather, of our synthesizer over time. So slow attack, sort of a bit of a drop with a sustain, but not too much of one, and a fairly long release. And let's hear how that affects our sound. Nice. I think I think this is dipping just a little bit lower than I'd like it to. So let's hear how our shuffle sounds now. Alright, that's nice. It's a bit subtler. I might fine-tune it a little later on, but this is sort of the building blocks of what I'd like the sound to be. And now I'd like to add a filter onto our sound. And instead of using the filter envelope, which I often do, I think I'd like the filter to map directly to the amplitude. So when the amplitude goes up, the frequency range that we're letting through the filter also goes up. So I'm going to set this fairly low to start without too much of a peak on it. And I'm just going to click the helmet and drag it right over to this frequency slider here. And let's set a sort of arbitrary start point. You know, fairly large, loud enough that you will hear a distinct change in the sound over time, but not a huge one. So let's hear that for a start. Might add a little bit more. And I might introduce what we have here, which I don't think I've used before, which is the key tracking feature, which is a way where essentially it is a bit of a modulator in itself, where it is a setting, you know, it's going to set, depending on which key you press, you know, the lower the key, the lower the starting point of this frequency is going to be. And the higher the key, the higher the starting point of that frequency is going to be. So it's basically just a way so that you can have, you know, low sounds, you know, remain fairly bassy and, you know, not too bright, but you can open it up and let more high sounds in the higher up you get, you know, on whatever instrument you're playing. And I'm going to add just a little bit of that to this so that if we do end up, you know, starting a melody here, it ends up going a little higher, you know, we'll be able to hear the fundamental note a little bit more. So as I'm thinking of it, you know, we have a bass here, and we might be playing some melodies on it, so I'd like to set up some of the general parameters here, especially our voices. Now, as a general rule, you will almost always be wanting just one voice with your bass, meaning that no matter how many keys I press, I can only have one instance of my synthesizer playing at a time. And I'd also like to go over here and turn on the portamento, which is just going to allow us to glide a little bit between notes. And you'll notice right now, every time I press a key, it just starts back at the beginning where there's no attack. So there's this awkward sort of pause, right? It makes it kind of hard for me to play a smooth sequence. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to click this little legato box right next to the portamento type in the very bottom right corner of our synth. And now, instead of starting back at the beginning of the envelope, when I, you know, am holding a key and, you know, switch over to a new one without releasing the first key, then I'm just going to continue on from the point I'm already at in the envelope, which will usually be at the sustain point. This way there's not that awkward gap, you just sort of continue where you left off and are able to complete the phrase. It sounds like this. Nice. I think with those settings in place, we're starting to get a little closer to the sound I want. And right now it's a bit bottom heavy. I'd like to add in a bit more higher frequency information in. So I'm going to start by adding in this sawtooth wave, which I think is probably the oscillator I want to keep. I want sort of a bright sound on top, maybe not at a super high volume, but enough that it's going to sort of add some, you know, higher end to this. Which you can sort of just hear poking through there. And I'm going to make that 3 voices with a bit of a higher spread. Nice, and you can see in the waveform up in our oscilloscope that does have some phasing going on because of the chorusing effect on the unison, which I think is nice and is sort of in keeping with the sound I'm aiming for here, which is a bit of an evolving Blade Runner bass type sound. And while I'm thinking of it, a pretty common effect that you might hear in this sort of genre of synthesis is something we used before in our chiptune lead, which was a bit of a vibrato, where we turn the tune of one of our oscillators back and forth really quickly. But instead of it doing it really quickly this time, I'd like to do more of a slow, gradual, pitching up and down. And I'm going to use this same LFO here that I was using earlier. I think I'll use that to start. I might end up using a different pitch or a different speed. I think I actually will use a different LFO because I don't want everything to fall exactly into sync. I think that can be a nice effect sometimes to have sort of a rhythmic ebb and flow to the sound, but I'm not sure that's what I want with this particular part of it. So I'm going to just click on the helmet here for this LFO. I'm just going to slightly alter the tuning knob here. Let's hear what it sounds like. And I'll turn this up a little bit more so you can really hear that effect. Nice. And I think I'd also like to add over here a square wave. And I'm going to turn that up an octave. So now we have a pretty big spread between the sub really, holding down the lowest note. Then we have an octave up from that, the sawtooth wave, and an octave up from that, we have this square wave. Let's hear what it sounds like together. Nice. Now, I said at the beginning that I want this to be an evolving wave, or an evolving synthesizer. And one great way we can do that is to have different oscillators come in sort of in staggered amounts at different times. And, right now we have everything generally mapped to this amplitude envelope. That's controlling the volume of the overall sound. But if we want to control individual levels, we might want to use one of these other envelopes here. So I'm going to go ahead and create sort of a similar waveform, or a similar envelope as I have in our amplitude envelope in our mod envelope. But I'm going to make it a bit longer. I think I'd like to map that to our oscillator 2, our higher square wave. So as the sound sort of continues, we get a bit more high end. And again, it's already going to be after the filter has mostly dropped down, so I'm not sure quite how much we'll hear it, but I'd like to give it a try. Let's hear how it sounds. Nice. So I think we've got a rough level, or a rough mix of the oscillators going now. I'd like to start thinking about some effects I might use to really, introduce some changes over time into this piece. And I think one of them is going to be modulating this little feedback up here, which I think I might have touched on very briefly in one of my earlier videos, but I'll get into it in a little bit more depth now. So this feedback section is actually an effect we call a comb filter, which is a type of delay that it's a little bit complicated. It's a very short delay that is set to particular frequencies. So the thing to keep in mind is that it is in tune in some way with the note that it is affecting. And we can change what tune that it's in by setting this transpose button. So if I tune it to 7, so it's a fifth above the note, let's say we have it at 0 now, I'm just going to hold down a note and I'll show you the effect when we increase the amount of this feedback. And actually, I think, I was thinking of just having it set to the standard, but I do sort of like that effect of having the 7th. I think it does sort of create a nice drone with a bit of, change in the harmonic over time. So I think I'd like to also get that set up to one of these LFOs, or maybe, you know, what we haven't explored yet is this cool step sequencer, which I think is one of my favorite parts of Helm. It's really awesome. And just like our LFOs and our amplitude envelope or mod envelope or whatever, this is something that we can use to modulate some parameters, but it's going to be very rhythmic. You can see it's changing right now every quarter note. You could set that to every, eighth note it goes to one of these different things. And just like our LFOs, there's this sort of 0 point. And then if we put things above that, we're increasing a value. And if we put it below, we're decreasing. So, we can sort of just make a random little rhythm here. And now, whatever we're mapping this to is just going to go 0, up, down, 0, up, down, 0, up, and then restart in sort of a rhythmic way. And if we want to, we can change it so it's just 6 steps. That way it's sort of this little repeating, yes, it's this little repeating 3-step sequence twice with slight differences. So let's see what happens if we map that to our amount here. You can see we're getting that rhythmic, increase, decrease, 0, increase, decrease, 0. And I'm going to show you what that sounds like. It'll sort of create a little melody using our feedback. Take a listen. And I'll increase the effect so you can really hear it. I might leave it at that for now. You can see how using just a bit of modulation, we can start to create these, with just one synthesizer, you can get a really complex sound that has lots of moving pieces. And we can go even further with that if we use what's called our poly LFO, which is similar in some ways to the mono LFOs, but instead of affecting, just one instance of a sound, or one, voice of the synthesizer, it affects, or rather, instead of affecting all of them at once, it affects individual voices of the synthesizer, which is not going to be a huge thing for this sound since it's mono, but basically every time you press a key, this LFO re-triggers and affects whatever voice was just pressed, which can lead to some really cool effects. And today I'm going to use it to create another sort of moving sort of melody using, let's say, our square wave. We're going to go up and down an octave, just, repeating using this by using the transpose function on this oscillator. So let me show you what I mean. I'm just going to go grab this, go 12 semitones. And so now, this poly LFO is going to keep on going up and down and up and down an octave as it cycles through the oscillator. And I'm just going to show you what that sounds like. I might start this a little bit lower so it really fades in, because it is set to the mod envelope. I'm going to increase that. We're really starting to get some sort of some nice little bleeps and bloops here, which I always love. And let's think if there's maybe something else we can, if we can map this step sequencer to. I think one thing that might be a nice effect is if we map it to the noise function on our mixer, which if we have it all the way up, you can hear. It's sort of just a cool little, it's a nice little sort of wind sound. And one thing you might notice is that it actually works with the feedback in sort of a pitched way if I have just the noise going. Let me show you what it sounds like. It's kind of a cool effect. It's sort of faint, but I really like how you can get just that sort of ghostly, almost sounds like granular synthesis, if people are familiar with that. But that's a digression. In any case, I think I had these about here, let's say. So I think I'd like to map the step sequencer to the noise to create sort of a rhythmic, almost like a hi-hat effect. And it's going to be fairly subtle, but I think it would just be a nice added touch. Let's hear what that sounds like with just a little bit in. Nice. All right. So now I think I'd like to finish things up by adding some of our effects over in this section. And then maybe I might end by adding a bit of added flair to our keyboard mod. But for now, let's start by adding a reverb. Nice. And one thing I might do here, this is a fairly minor thing, but sometimes, because, you know, the reverb in Helm works really well for some things, but there are some times where I feel like it just, you know, it gets a little too crunchy for my taste. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually use the amplitude envelope to duck the mix of the reverb so that when this is at its peak, the reverb is the quietest. Which is fine because you know you wouldn't hear it too much there, you know. Well, I mean, I guess I don't know. Sometimes the peak it really sticks through and it sticks around for a while, and it sometimes the high notes I don't know, they sort of add some sort of artifacts to the top, which I don't love. So I'm actually going to just dip the mix by sending the mod wheel out to the mix and putting it in the negative. So now, the louder the synth is, the quieter the reverb mix will be, which will also have the nice effect of giving us a nice long tail at the end as it fades out. So let's hear that. And I think I'll do the same thing, or the opposite, with the damping. So that, it starts out, fairly long reverb. And then, when we hit this peak here, it doesn't last for very long. Nice. And one thing that I am going to change here is I'm actually going to switch the poly LFO. Let's see, what do I have that set to? Just this. I'm going to switch the poly LFO and the mono LFO. Reason being that, and this is sort of a minor detail, but it's bothering me. So the mono LFO is just always in sync with, the track that you're playing in and everything else. It's all iterating at the same exact pace, with the step sequencer and everything. So if you're doing something rhythmic, it's great because everything's going to fall exactly in line. But the poly LFO, because it re-triggers every time you press a note, if you're not playing with a metronome, or if you're a little off rhythmically, and you're putting a rhythmic thing into your modulation, it sometimes gets wonky and it falls out of sync. So I'm instead just going to, have this mono LFO here, being in control of this little bleeping and blooping. And I'm going to have this poly LFO be in charge of the tune of this, which hopefully should sync up our rhythms a little bit more nicely. Nice. Okay. I think lastly I'm going to add a little bit of distortion, which I, again, am going to map to my amplitude. And I think I'm going to have, the strength of the LFO that's controlling the square wave be mapped to, let's say, a mod wheel. That way I can sort of filter it in as I'm playing, so I can hold down a note here. You know, and then as we're going along, I can sort of add that in. I think that's not quite what I want to do, actually. I'm going to delete that because I'm noticing the problem is that it now, sort of as I'm going along and I'm, you know, between this 0 point and the peak, I get sort of these awkward in-between notes, which, you know, is not quite what I want. So I think I'll just directly affect the volume of the oscillator instead, and I'll turn it off from this mod envelope. Or maybe I'll turn it, rather than turn it off, I'll just turn it down a bit. Okay, let's hear what it sounds like. Let's fade it in. I think I still have the mod wheel affecting something. Yeah, there it is. Weird. All right. Nice. Well, I think I am not going to gild the lily too much here. I am just going to leave this where it stands. Yeah, I think I've already done a lot to this, and I think I'll get into some of the concepts I've gone over here a little bit later at another time, especially what you can do as far as rhythmic stuff with the step sequencer. You know, you can really just do some great things, which I quite like. Oh, what the heck, I'll do one more thing. I'm just going to change the tune of the feedback over time. Just add a little bit more warble to this. And now I'm done. Hands are off. I'm done. I'm giving up. And I hope you enjoy whatever you create with some of the things we learned tonight. This was a bit more of a rambling one. I tend to, and I'm sure you'll see this as the videos go on, I tend to get really pretty nitty-gritty with, you know, once I start adding a bunch of different modulations, you know, I'll fine-tune things. And the great thing about Helm is that it is so open-ended, and that you can modulate, you know, pretty much anything with pretty much anything, but that also can lead to me trying a lot of weird things and, you know, backing up off of them, and, you know, that whole process, which is really great and super fun for me, but might feel a little meandering to you, the audience. But in any case, I hope you learned something and enjoyed the sound. And I'll just play it for a minute and fade out on that. Have a good night.